Hello and welcome to our AP World podcast.
Your hosts today are
Olivia, Sophia,
Keira, and Sascha.
We will be covering topics about the Industrial Revolution and how it spread to places all over the world.
So let's get started.
During the Second Industrial Revolution, we see a lot of advancements in industries like steel, chemicals, and electricity. How are these significant, and how did they lead to new possibilities in production and transportation?
During the Industrial Revolution, many new advancements led to possibilities in transportation and production. The Bessemer process resulted in cheap production of steel, allowing it to be used more frequently and for a number of different purposes. Steel cables, rods, and sheet steel were all introduced. It was used in manufacturing, making machinery and generators. It was also used for constructing buildings and factories. In transportation, steel was used for making automobiles, railroads, and steel ships. Electricity made production practices safer because there was less risk of fire. Electricity aided in long-distance communication because it was used for both the telegraph and the telephone. Chemicals were another development that was significant to production and transportation. Chemicals like sulfuric acid especially were beneficial. Chemicals made new materials, which in turn were used to make machinery. Some of these machines were used for aiding in transportation.
Other important advancements in the Industrial Revolution include advancements in transportation and communication. How did these advancements affect both internal and external migration during the 19th century?
The inventions created didn't just contribute to production, but also to the movement of people around the world. Railroads reduced travel time and connected vast distances. This picture was taken during the Second Industrial Revolution. It shows the first transcontinental railroad. Because of railroads like this one, that linked far places, railroads contributed to westward expansion. People could reach new settlements and find jobs there. There was much more frequent movement between cities and rural, newly colonized lands. Ships increased transportation overseas because sea travel was now faster and readily available to the public. Large numbers of immigrants migrated across the sea, especially from Europe to North America. Ships no longer relied on wind, so global migration patterns changed significantly. People had access to new ports, so remote areas could travel abroad for new work. Other than vehicles, the telegraph and telephone also changed the extent of migration. They allowed rapid long-distance communication.
Industrialization soon spread to the United States and Russia. How did their processes compare, and could their efforts be considered successful?
Efforts of the United States and Russia in the late 19th centuries, highlighting their successes and their challenges. The Second Industrial Revolution sparked rapid technological advancements characterized by the expansion of railroads and the introduction of electricity as well as the assembly line, with influential figures such as Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller, driven the rise of big businesses. In contrast, Russia's industrialization began later in the 1880s, primarily though government strategies such as the investing in the Trans-Siberian railroads. However, it faced significant challenges, including political instability, reliance on foreign investments, and largely rural societies that struggled to adapt industrial practices, resulting in the less industrialization compared to that of the United States.
Another place that industrialization spread was to Latin America during the 19th century. How was the industrialization process there, and how successful were their efforts?
The industrialization process during the 19th centuries in Latin America involved various attempts to modernization, but these efforts were generally limited compared to those in the United States and Europe. Countries such as Argentina and Brazil made progress with railroads and some manufacturing driven by agricultural exports. However, many nations remained dependent on foreign investments and technologies, which hindered their ability to develop independent industrial economies. While some cities experienced infrastructural growth, overall industrialization was slow, uneven due to the political instability and the economic challenges, leading to the continued reliance on agriculture and exports. The degree of success in industrialization was limited as many countries struggled to achieve sustainable growth and transition their rural economies to more industrialization ones.
There were many different political, economic, and social reactions to the industrial age. How did socialism emerge as a reaction to capitalism, and what were the complaints? Socialism is defined as an economic and political system where the means of production are publicly owned by either the government or by the workers collectively. Capitalism is defined as an economic system where the means of production are privately owned, or in other words, businesses manage themselves based on supply and demand. Capitalism created lots of problems within society. For example, it created a large gap between the rich and the poor. A very small group of people were gaining wealth from this system, and a much larger group weren't gaining anything. The lower classes were struggling a lot with this system by having low wages and excruciatingly long work hours. Another issue with this system was that the basic needs, like healthcare and education, were somewhat out of reach for the working class. The philosopher Karl Marx thought that the flaws of the capitalist society would lead to its collapse, paving the way for the rise of socialism. He believed that socialism would eliminate exploitation and lead to a more just and equal society. Another solution that Marxists offered was communism. They believed it would eliminate class distinctions and overall get rid of inequality in society. A big emergence of the Industrial Revolutions were labor movements. Why were they happening? What were their demands? And how did they achieve success?
Labor movements in the 19th century were particularly interesting. As rapid urbanization grew, the working conditions for workers, along with quality of life, diminished, causing many workers to be left unsatisfied. More specifically, the movements were caused by harsh working conditions, including long hours, very low wages, unsafe environments, and a lack of rights for workers, along with the extensive exploitation of child labor. These conditions, in addition to the growing awareness of social injustices with the socialist and reformist ideologies, would encourage workers to organize and fight for their rights. Some of the major demands of the workers in these labor movements were improved wages to meet their needs, shorter working hours, and safer working conditions, as concerns about workplace accidents and hazards would fuel the demands for safety regulations. They also had labor movements that often advocated for laws to limit child labor. And lastly, they would demand the right to unionize. Establishing the ability to collectively bargain through unions would become a core demand of the workers. The tactics they employed to achieve their demands would include strikes, where workers would collectively refuse to work until their demands were met, boycotts, where they refused to buy goods from a company to pressure them to change practices, and public demonstrations and rallies, which involved using public pressure to highlight worker grievances and fight for change. A few notable organizations for workers was the National Labor Union, advocating in the U.S. for 8-hour workdays and labor reforms, and the Knights of Labor that aimed to organize skilled and unskilled workers.
It's important to discuss not only the European reactions to industrialization, but also Asian states. How did the Ottomans and the Qing dynasties react to industrialization?
Asian states, such as the Ottoman Empire and the Qing dynasty, had ambitious reactions when faced with the rise of European industrialization. Both the Ottoman Empire and the Qing dynasty attempted to modernize through several ways, one of which were reform movements, but the reforms were often superficial and did not fully address the underlying economic and social issues that hampered their industrial development. These reforms were largely unsuccessful, also because of the resistance from conservative elites in both empires that resisted changes, particularly those that could threaten their power and traditional social structures. These elites and the unsuccess in their reforms left them vulnerable to Western influence and imperial expansion. The Ottomans would approach this by implementing the Tanzimat reforms aimed at modernizing the Ottoman legal system, improving education, and reducing corruption, but ultimately failed due to internal opposition and failure to industrialize. The Qing dynasty, on the other hand, would initiate the self-strengthening movement, primarily focused on military upgrades and limited adoption of Western technology. This approach is discussed in this primary source. This excerpt from On the Adoption of Western Learning by Feng Guifen discusses the Europeans' new agricultural technology and how it could be beneficial if it were recreated for Qing dynasty use. Guifen hopes that the intellectual people of China follow in the European footsteps and surpassed them in technology, maths, and sciences.
That's all we have for this episode.
Thank you for listening, and we hope you learned something new about the Industrial Revolution.